They don't
Come on.
They're entitled.
Okay, we're on it.
All right. Okay.
All right, so down to the business of Torah. As we talked about last week, we are at the threshold of moving into the land of Israel. We have gone through all those 40 years of we don't get to go because of the spies and the response of the community. But now it's so close you can taste it. How close is it, you ask? Right? Well, where are we now? When with our fight against Midian and against Moab and Amorites and other people done, where are we sitting?
Well, I think Moses was just told, go up on that mountain over there and you'll be able to see it.
Exactly, because he's going up on the mountain. See one of my other sketchy drawings of Israel. Let's see, as big as it used to be. Right, so says go up, and basically we're over here. And you can look in and see the land, right? But while Moses is looking in, some of the other tribes are looking around. They're going, good cattle country here. And that's where we're going to pick up. So we are in Matot Masei, double parashah this week, but we're only going to be studying together from one part, page 949, chapter 32. So we're chapter 32 in Bamidbar, chapter 32 of the book of Numbers. What's that? Is that the part you're reading?
I'm not sure if I'm reading that part or if it's just part of what we're doing this week.
For the triennial.
Yeah.
I forget what reading I am, but I'm the start of Masei.
Well, then you're not reading this.
No.
All right, so how about reading today? Do we have a volunteer?
Do you want to read it?
If you would like to, go ahead.
All right, Eric.
Okay. The Reubenites and the Gadites owned cattle in very great numbers.
All right, so first of all, as we go through this, little alarm bells from time to time should go off, right? So the Reubenites and Gadites, that means to say the tribe of Reuben and the tribe of Gad, owned a lot of cattle. What recently would that, what?
How?
How? Well, there'd be two questions to that, right? One, how, meaning we left Egypt, so where'd they get their cows? But if you remember way back when Moses was dickering with Pharaoh about can we go, can we not, one of the conditions was when we go, we're taking our flocks with us and our herds. So they definitely had herds and flocks back in Egypt. And apparently Reuben and Gad had a lot.
But in 40 years in the desert, they found food for the cattle in the desert?
What were they eating in the desert? Because the cattle eat man? We don't know. It's a little surprising.
Yeah.
And
But why wouldn't they have had food if they had all these cows with them?
And not just why wouldn't they generically have food, but very recently, the whole quail argument about we don't have meat, we want meat, but they got a bunch of cows, right? So, but apparently they didn't want to eat their cows. They wanted someone else to provide the meat because, cows are important financial resources. So it's I've got my own car, but I'd rather you drove and used your gas.
In fact, there are no gas stations anywhere in the desert. Pay no attention to that.
The analogy doesn't go perfect, exactly.
But with the cows, they're healthy, big herds, so they've multiplied. And I can't recall seeing grass growing in the desert when we drove through that area.
No, the Sinai is not known for its pasture land.
Not now.
Not now? Maybe then? Maybe. Okay, so that's got to get our attention right off the bat. We got a couple of tribes with really big herds, and they'd like to say something.
Noting that the land of Jazer and Gilead were a region suitable for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community and said, hey guys, the land that the Lord has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. It would be a favor to us, they continued, if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Do not move us across the Jordan.
All right. So what's their proposal?
We stay.
Yeah. You know what? I know that everyone's looking forward to going across the Jordan River and getting here, but we'll take that. And the rest of you can have that. Sound good?
Yeah.
Any questions? Any problems?
It's not in God's plan.
Right.
That's an animal that all the children of Israel know Israel.
The allotment of Israel is over here. How do we know for sure that this is the only spot that's being talked about as being Israel?
Because Abraham walked it.
Because Abraham walked it, and who's not walking it?
Us.
Moses. if Moses is here looking across the Jordan into Israel, and Moses is never allowed to go into Israel, this must not be Israel, right? Because otherwise Moses would have been there already, and been there, done that. So this does seem to be a little bit like, I'm sorry, did you just say what God offered you wasn't good enough? But think from their point of view about why they might want this. How did we decide in previous chapters the land was going to be divided? Random lot. Well, it's not really random lot though, is it?
Well, okay, so you can say God is controlling who gets what lot.
All right, so we're pulling names out of a hat, basically. Theoretically, that's meant to be a way to allow God to influence the allocation. But if you are Reuben and Gad, and you already see a piece of land that you'd be perfectly happy with, and God conquered it, right? They give full credit for God conquering this land. Why risk the luck of the draw?
That's good business sense for sure. But
Yeah. Well, you know, it's do you go ahead and take what's offered now, or do you hold out and hope that you're going to get something better later? You know,
Yeah.
And hey, they're doing everyone else a favor, because these two, and we're going to find out later, half of Manasseh are on this side of the Jordan. That means the rest of it gets divided up among the other tribes. So everyone else gets more land.
and you have allies to the east.
And you have allies to the east.
They will-
Oh, you mean they'll have a buffer zone, right?
Jordanians.
Oh.
To keep the Jordanians.
Yeah.
Small anachronism at the moment. All right, so maybe it's a really good idea, right? They take their name out of the hat. Everyone else gets a bigger portion. They get what they need. Square deal all around.
Okay.
What's the name of the land that they want?
Well, this is the land
It's not Jordan,
of
it's-
Moab and Midian and
That's,
the Amorite land.
Okay.
There's like different tribal blocks.
didn't have a name.
No, it wasn't like France.
No.
Okay.
No, it was just different tribal confederation clusters, much like Israel becomes once Joshua leads the people in.
Right.
Those are people that attacked us that we defeated. And that's
Exactly. We were just planning to walk through. Remember, we tried to make agreements and arrangements to come through the land and not have any trouble, and then that didn't work out so well for us. That actually is not anachronistic. That does seem to be a
That's
repeat in history.
Yes.
But yeah, so this was not supposed to be part of our allotment. We weren't supposed to conquer it. But once they attacked us and we fought back, then the land did fall into our purview.
Gee, it sounds like
Yeah, it does.
Gaza and
Yeah,
West
it's,
Bank,
we didn't have to give it back.
well, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay. Moses replied to the Gadites and the Reubenites, "Are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them? That is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to survey the land. After going up to the Wadi, Eshcol, and surveying the land, they turned the minds of the Israelites from invading the land that the Lord had given them. Thereupon the Lord was incensed, and he swore, 'None of the men from 20 years up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me, none except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they remained loyal to the Lord.' The Lord was incensed at Israel, and for 40 years he made them wander in the wilderness until the whole generation that had provoked the Lord's displeasure was gone. And now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel? If you turn away from him and he abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all this people."
Okay,
Whoa, that's quite the speech.
that's quite a speech for a man who doesn't make speeches.
Yeah, wow.
That was a long rant,
Yeah.
a very long rant. And you almost feel a little bit sorry for the poor Reubenites and Gadites, because you had the daughters of Zelophehad come up last week, and they asked about this inheritance question, and boom, Moses was off to God, asking what God thought of this, and everything worked out fine. And so you can almost imagine, the Reubenites and Gadites sitting in the wings, going, "Hey, they're giving out free stuff. Like, quick, let's get in line." And Moses, we have this idea. And it's just, whoa, where did that come from? Well, what's Moses' concern?
And there's going to be repercussions from God because it's It's akin to the story of the spies.
Sounds like
You
the
don't wanna-
spy.
Sounds like you don't want to go in there and take the land.
The land God offered you isn't good enough. You're not willing to go across the Jordan. You want to keep this instead. This is the same kind of rebelliousness of the spies who said, oh, we should just leave it alone because it's too hard for us. And there is definitely an accusation of cowardice.
Yes.
Right? Hey, we've already won this war and got this land. Why go fight another war where we might die? Just settle here, right? This is good enough, and now it's safe. And Moses gives them what for? Because not only is he accusing them, as we just said, of their own cowardice, he's also accusing them of undermining the morale of the entire rest of the nation, who might also look around and say, you know what? They got a point. If we can find bits of land from what we've already done that we don't have to go fight for because we've already done the fight, that sounds a lot safer than going and fighting, especially because we know the people across this land are pretty mighty. You know, that whole Jericho thing, right? Okay. Response.
Then they stepped up to him and said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children, and we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion, but we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan.
All right, so what's their proposal?
We'll fight and help you win the land, but we want our families to be safe on this side. And then once we've won the land, you can have it all and we'll still stay on our side. Even though we fought for it, we'll stay on our side.
Not like they were cowards.
Right.
Not like where they go. How are they saying specifically they're not cowards?
We'll be the first. We'll be
They're the
shock
vanguards,
troops.
the shock troop, right? They'll be the ones in front, which is the most dangerous position in the army. So not only are they saying we'll fight alongside of our brothers for their portion, even as we keep our own, and we won't ask for anything over here, but we will put ourselves in harm's way, additional harm's way, in order to prove to you that we're not actually cowards. Convincing? Sound like a fair arrangement? Well, let's see what Moses thinks.
Moses said to them, if you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of the Lord, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan at the instance of the Lord until he has dispossessed his enemies before him, and the land has been subdued at the instance of the Lord, and then you return, you shall be clear before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding under the Lord. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against the Lord, and know that your sin will overtake you. Build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks, but do what you have promised. The Gadites and the Reubenites answered Moses, your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our children, our wives, our flocks, and all our other livestock will stay behind in the towns of Gilead, while your servants, all those recruited for war, cross over at the instance of the Lord to engage in battle as my Lord orders.
Okay, Kathy?
Why is Moses able to decide this on his own?
Oh,
You mean, where's God?
yeah.
He had to
He
run off.
calls God's name a million times in
That's right.
the paragraph.
There was a little noticeable, right?
But
Yeah.
he never asked. He says, okay, that this will be okay with God.
Well,
This wasn't as big
Is-
a problem as the apportionment to the daughters of Shlomo.
this wasn't as novel a problem, perhaps. I mean, the size of the problem may not be the issue because we have whole tribes here, whereas in the other one, it was, just one family. But apparently Moses feels that the underlying issue has been reconciled.
But I
And
wonder,
that issue is clear already as being okay from God.
isn't this Moses being angry at God? Because remember, Moses ain't going into that land. They're all going. Everybody can go but him. I don't think he wants to talk to God again. He don't want to hear any more opinions. If he's not going to get in, fine, you guys go. But I think he's annoyed.
He's definitely annoyed at the start. Whether he's reconciled at the end with a warning is a little bit more questionable. Although, do think for a second how he would have personally felt when a whole group, 2 tribes, said, you know that part of Israel that your heart longs to see? You know that part that God has promised, that God says you can't get to go, but we can? We don't want to go. I would die to step foot over the Jordan, and you're so close and won't.
Right. Right.
It's just, it must have been a very bitter pill for him to swallow when they came up and asked him this question.
Yes.
But how can he decide? Well, he has to already know that the land that's been conquered is now considered open for settlement and for conquest. And so the idea that some Israelites would eventually live here is perfectly fine within the laws of ancient warfare. The real question was, what about fighting alongside your brothers? Won't you go and fight with them too? Even though you've got yours, it seems like you're backing out of the fight. When they agree to fight, then it's all been settled, right? Because, okay, fine, if you want to have your allotment over here, that's fine, as long as you're willing to fight alongside.
I guess from a tactical, operational sense, who's guarding the wives and the children?
Oh, well, they mentioned that it's going to be in the fortified towns. So that will keep them safe because they'll be in the fortified.
It means they're gonna build walls and stuff.
Right. So they
So that if anybody comes to attack them, they know.
where was the
inside
phrase precise? There we go.
It's
17, verse 17, and we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land.
Did they fortify the towns as they conquered?
It doesn't say explicitly, but I think they are going to fortify them. They're going to build the towns and the folds to protect their herds and protect their families.
So then there was some assumption that they were going to maintain a presence in that land.
Yes, they would. And certainly some of them, those who were not of the census military age, would have remained in that land as well.
Yeah, mostly the military fighters, people over 40 or 45 or whatever the cutoff age was, will probably stay.
Right.
Stay with the.
Exactly. In a fortified position, which is much more defensible. Okay, so our tradition, as you might guess, has a lot to say about the Reubenites and Gadites. Because their request does seem shocking. Did I forget to leave one for myself? Does seem to sort of, whoa, the whole deal, 40 years was this land, and now all of a sudden you're happier over here, and aren't you going to help us? That comes out in the Midrashim. Okay, so let's see what our tradition says.
3 gifts were created in the world: wisdom, strength, and wealth. If a man is privileged to possess one of them, he can claim as his own the most precious things in the whole world. If he is privileged to possess wisdom, he has attained everything. If he is privileged to possess strength, he has attained everything. If he is privileged to possess wealth, he has attained everything.
All right, any questions? Make sense?
No.
No?
No.
Because you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, you get everything?
Everything. No.
Didn't he?
Yeah.
Almost.
Right, I
He
mean,
did. That's true.
even in our modern world, where strength is not necessarily the end all and be all to work or to war, being very strong can have a lot of perks that go far beyond how big of a barbell can you lift. And similarly, being wealthy, right? We might like to imagine that just because you're rich doesn't give you any other advantages other than what your money can buy, but often what your money can buy provides spillover benefits in many, many realms. And similarly, just because you're very wise or clever, does that necessarily mean you should be blessed with other things? Well, but we do see people who are very wise or clever also being blessed outside of their realm of expertise, right? So, all right, 2,000 years ago, so I think our rabbis had a pretty good lay of the land of what things were like. But
When does this apply? When they are gifts of heaven and come through the force of the Torah. But the strength and wealth of mortals are nothing, as is borne out by what Solomon says.
right, so let me just make sure we got before we get to the proof text, the idea that it's trying to prove, which is you can be strong or you can be strong. And if your strength comes through God, from Torah, from a source of real blessing, then it's going to have all this wonderful impact. And if it comes from some other source, which we're going to get into, don't expect it to work out so well.
So Solomon said, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all.
That's why the book of Kohelet is considered very depressing, because he's very frank. And he looked around the world and said, you know what? Just because you're the fastest guy doesn't mean you always win the race. Just because you're the smartest guy doesn't mean you always end up the richest, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't seem to be 100% correlation between the gift and the blessings that might flow from it, which means you have to explain why is it that sometimes the swift guy wins and sometimes the swift guy loses. And the idea is that the swift guy that wins, it's coming, his gift is coming through Torah. The swift guy who loses, not.
Jeremiah, in the same way, says, "Thus says the Lord."
And by the way, this is going to sound very familiar in a few weeks when we chant this for the Haftarah of Tisha B'Av.
Oh. "Let not the wise one glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty one glory in his might. Let not the rich glory in his riches, but let him that glories glory in this, that he understands and knows me, for that I am the Lord who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth, for in these I delight."
Right? So you are the wisest guy in the room. You think in Judaism, being the wisest guy in the room, you'd be allowed to feel a little, you know, a little swagger's okay. I mean, you're made. You've done what you're supposed to do, which is to be wise. That's not what you're supposed to revel in. That's not what you're supposed to glory in. It's not, look how smart I am, look how rich I am, look how strong I am. If you're going to glory in anything, and that isn't a bit of an if, then what you should truly take pride of is how well you understand God. And understanding God means understanding, as it says, kindness, justice, righteousness. Right? That's where you should take your pride. Again, not arrogance, but pride. Make sense? Okay. So far, the rabbis, I think, are doing pretty well.
These gifts, when they do not come from the Holy One, blessed be he, will ultimately fail a man. Why? Because their gifts were not from the Holy One, blessed be he, but they snatched it for themselves. Likewise, in the case of the children of God and the children of Reuven.
Here comes back to our parasha.
You find that they were rich, possessing large numbers of cattle, but they loved their money and settled outside the land of Israel. Consequently, they were the first of all the tribes to go into exile, as borne out by the text. And he carried them away, even the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. What brought it on them? The fact that they separated themselves from their brothers because of their possessions.
Remember our first verse? All right, what was our first verse? They had lots of cattle, which is the equivalent of saying they had a really big investment portfolio, right? They were very, very wealthy. And apparently what the rabbis are doing here is connecting that opening line and their priorities, which we're going to see are a little skewed, to a character flaw, which says no, they had on offer the land of Israel, but they chose to do what they thought would be better for their pocketbook. And because of that, 1,000 years later, those gifts didn't work out so well. And they were the first to be carried off by the Assyrian invasion, 20 years before the northern kingdom was conquered. Right? As Assyria came down, they swept this bank of the Jordan River before eventually conquering the northern kingdom. So they took 20 years off of their life because they thought that going after what would make them rich was more important than going after the land of Israel.
Well, it was rich now rather than rich later, perhaps.
Which is the question.
Everything in the land should have been enough.
Not just enough, but it was supposed to be that the land of Israel was the most blessed land.
Right.
So you think your cows do well here, imagine how well they do over there. Right. It should always have been in their mind that whatever was across that river that God had promised them would be better than what was here.
Right.
But that's not the way they looked at it. They looked at the immediate return that they thought they could get, and it can't get any better than this, so let's go here. And the sages are using their example as a way of trying to teach this lesson that if you pursue wealth as your primary objective, it will eventually fail you. Or if you pursue wisdom, or if you pursue strength as your primary objective. If you pursue it as a secondary objective, or as a means to the end, I want to be wise in order to understand God. I want to be strong in order to be able to live a happy and good life and fulfill the mitzvot. I want to be wealthy in order that I can be able to act in this world in a good and just and righteous way. No problem. Because you will have your rudder firmly affixed and you will not veer off course to the wrong side of the river because that's where your cows like it. Make sense? Okay. So again, nothing wrong with having the blessings of wisdom, wealth, or strength, but they have to be directed in the right way. And that's what they mean by the others snatched the blessings from God. They took what they thought would make them, in this case, rich, rather than pursuing other goals with wealth as a support for those goals. All right, another midrash.
This bears on what scripture says. A wise man's understanding is at his right hand, but a fool's understanding at his left.
I apologize to all lefties in the room.
A expression, a wise man's understanding is at his right hand, applies to the good inclination,
Right? The Yetzer HaTov.
which is set on one's right, while the expression, a fool's understanding at his left, applies to the evil inclination, which is set on one's left.
And the Yetzer Hara is over here. We even hear this within the English language when we talk about the left side being the sinister side.
Okay.
Right? That's what the word is left is sinister because the left side was the evil side. Again, I apologize to lefties.
Left and Latin is sinister.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So this is just a little introduction midrash, but the basic idea is right side, left side, you may think it makes no difference, but listening to the right side of you, the right side, the correct side, makes all the difference. And the wisdom between a wise and a fool may look very, very similar. I mean, as similar as your right and left hand, but the direction each takes you is going to be very, very different. So that's just the little midrash that we open up with. But devar acher, there is another way to understand this.
Another exposition is that the expression, a wise man's understanding is at his right hand, refers to the righteous who apply their minds to the Torah, which is on the right. As it is said, at his right hand was a fiery law unto them, while a fool's understanding at his left alludes to the wicked who set their minds on getting rich. As it is said, in her left hand are riches and honor.
Right, so we compare and contrast two verses, one from the book of Devarim, one from the book of Mishlei of Proverbs, because we want to find where else does the Torah talk about right hands and left hands? Well, we get these two examples. So apparently listening to the advice that says go towards Torah, that's your right. The advice that says get rich now, ask me how, bumper sticker on the back of my car, that you're listening to the wrong side. Make sense? Okay, let's come back to our Torah portion for the next midrash.
Another exposition. The expression, a wise man's understanding is at his right hand, applies to Moses, while a fool's understanding at his left applies to the children of Reuven and the children of Gad, who made the main thing the subordinate and put the subordinate thing first.
Right,
They
so
cherish,
that's a common rabbinic phrase of you've reversed priorities.
for they cherish their property more than human life, saying to Moses, we will build sheepfolds here for our cattle and cities for our little ones.
So what's the problem with that verse?
The wrong order.
Cows first.
They mentioned the cows first, right? We're going to build places for the cows, and then we'll build places for our kids. Excuse me. What? And
Moses said to them, that is not right. Rather do the more important things first. Build yourself cities for your little ones, and afterwards folds for your sheep.
All right, so that is one of those nuances that we have to thank our blessed sages for pointing out to us, which when we read through, I don't know if anyone noticed.
No.
But they had asked, we want to build cities, or build cow folds, and we want to build cities. And when Moses responds to them with the affirmative that it's okay, he says, all right, go and build your cities for your kids and your cow folds. So Moses very subtly reverses the order of their words when he gives them permission. It's verses 16 for their question and 24 for his response. And if you notice as well, if you just flip to 24,
It's right at the top of 952.
when they respond, right, verses 25 and 26, we'll do as you've said, our children, our wives, our flocks, and all other livestock will stay behind. They got the message. They've got the right order now. They begin with the children and their wives, and then they mention the animals. So Moses taught them a little something there after the rant, and things got squared away. But it's very, very easy to let those priorities get flipped. And the Midrash is saying, That's the difference between your right hand and your left, is just you get it backwards and you're in trouble. All right, one more take on this.
The Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, seeing that you have shown greater love for your cattle than for human souls, by your life there will be no blessing in it. Of them it says, an estate may be gotten hastily at the beginning, but the end thereof shall not be blessed. In the same strain it says, weary not thyself to be rich, cease from thine own wisdom. And who is rich? He that is contented with his lot.
Which is a quote from Pirkei Avot, of course.
As it is said, when thou eatest the labor of thy hands, happy shalt thou be, and it shall be well with thee.
My apologies for not correcting the King James's versions.
Yes.
But the idea here being that you need to focus on what is meant to be the priority. And the priority absolutely will need you to also work. That's the whole idea of to eat the labor of your own hands. No one's saying that you shouldn't work. No one's saying that you shouldn't make your providing for your families a very important part of your daily goals. But that's not the goal. The goal is what you accomplish with having provided and what you are able to do. And you need to keep that balanced, right? So work essential in order that ... Not work is essential, period. Make sense? Maybe? Yes? Easy to get confused over that sometimes, day in, day out, doing a job. Okay, but as great as it is to rake the Gadites and Reubenites over the coals for this wonderful midrashic material that we can then use to say, this is the most important thing in life, these guys have it all messed up, are we really being fair to them? And did they really deserve this? Are we sure? I mean, okay, fine, we got this really close reading where they mentioned their cows before their kids, and now we're just going to nail them to the wall for that? Really? Is that it's okay because it must have been a Freudian slip showing their true self? Or is this just, using the words to teach a lesson? Is it fair to them? If you were descended from the tribe of Reuben, would you think, well, that's a fair depiction of my family? Maybe not. Well, we got a bit of an argument among our traditions. So let's hear first from Abarbanel.
The children of Gad and Reuben wished to tell Moses that despite his great wisdom, he had misunderstood their intention.
Right? They thought Moses, after his rant, had gotten it wrong. It's like, so Moses, we see this land here. Would you mind if we were able to stay here? And Moses goes, how can you ask for such a horrible thing? And they're like, chill, man, that wasn't what we meant. I know you're wise and everything, but maybe this time you also should have gone and asked God, because you've jumped to a conclusion about what we're asking to do. Did we say we weren't going to go fight? That wasn't part of their description of they said we just want to build for our families and have this land. So
out of respect for him, they approached him to tell him quietly, our master, you have not understood our words and our intention. We do not wish to settle here immediately. Rather, we shall pass over armed and go to war with our brethren.
Right? So how many times has someone said something to us and we immediately interpret it in the least favorable way possible? And perhaps we explode at them, as Moses did, or perhaps we just bury that bitterness inside of us and carry it. I can't believe they said such a, they're just wanting to do that. It happens occasionally. No, never. We're always the most open and fair-minded when someone says something which might initially seem to us to be an outlandish request.
I mean, they're just responding to his rant. They didn't come to him and say, first, we're going to go across. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of business first. That only came after he got upset.
Thank you, Akedat Yitzchak.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I didn't read it.
No, it's okay. I wasn't accusing you, but it's exactly right. Is that Abarbanel is giving them the benefit of the doubt. And Ramban as well, in a much longer commentary that I didn't quote, is saying, they always intended, or at least probably always intended, to be part of the military endeavor across the river and all of that. And Moses launched into this huge diatribe, but Moses got it wrong. and didn't understand what they were really trying to say. And so when they fill him in after that rant and saying, well, of course we're going to go along and be the fighters, that was always their plan. But there are many other people, many other commentators who say, no, if that was always their plan, that should have been way up at the beginning. And the Torah would not have mentioned their cattle as their primary defining feature. The Torah would not have mentioned building the folds rather than the cities first. That the order of the text is not to their credit.
Going back to my other question about how could he speak for God, maybe he already knew that this was okay. That's why he was able to speak for God. But, we're talking about how we often jump to assumptions of people's motivations and behaviors. And that is based on our own experience. We attribute motivations to them only because of what we've experienced ourselves.
Or sometimes done ourselves.
Right. And so therefore, this, to my mind, becomes an example of exactly why he's not going over.
Fill that out, yeah.
He is ascribing to people motivations that may not be there and negative at nicely.
To be diplomatic, yes.
Yes, and that's not the kind of leader that people need.
Should we get water from this rock, you rebels?
Right.
That's when God says, I'm sorry, you're now disqualified from going across the river. Maybe it was because, and many of the commentators posit this, because of the harshness with which he responded to them. Maybe because he was hearing all of the complaints about the quail and about not going up to Israel because it was too hard, and why did we ever leave Egypt, and it was so much better back then. Maybe because he only could hear those complaints in even an innocent request and responded constantly like he was talking to the people of 40 years ago. Or maybe they really did mean it and had the same spirit of 40 years ago. Let's get Yitzchak's response on the table so we can make them fight.
Indeed, it appears that Moshe, our master of blessed memory, with his wealth of wisdom, understood their true intention. For their original intention was not to pass over with them to war. And this is what they meant when they said, do not bring us over the Jordan. Moreover, it is written, and the children of, it is not written, and the children of Gad and the children of Reuben said to him, but rather, and they approached him and said.
All right, so let me just pause to make sure we see that, because it's a little confusing without the Hebrew. If you look back on verse 16, that's the bottom of page 950, we get a new verb in the conversation, right? It's a common Hebrew verb, but it's one that has not appeared yet. So this is after Moses' rant. Right up at the very beginning, Vayomru, they said. But now down in verse 16, Vayikshu, and they approached. Vayikshu, right, this root, usually means approaching in a manner of supplication. And what Akedat Yitzchak is saying is, if this had always been their intention, it would have been Vayomru when they first said their idea of staying behind. And then when Moses said, how could you do this? They would have Vayomru, and then they explained, then they said the second part. But by the change of verb, Akedat Yitzchak is going to argue they are coming back humbled and humiliated and supplicating by changing their request to meet what Moses has reprimanded them about. Let's see how he plays with this.
Meaning that they had heard what he said and had reconsidered. And thereafter they came back to him with their answer.
Right, so they listened to what he said and his points, and they went, he's got a point. We can't just stay over here on our side of the river and our cows and all of that. We're going to have to swallow our pride and go back to Moses and say, we'll go with you. Now, there's another point in favor of Akedat Yitzchak. When they go back and say, we'll go with you, what do they propose militarily? Go first. Why should they go first? Right?
In order to prove the opposite of what Moses accused them of.
Exactly. In order to make a point. Now, that, in my mind, and Akedat Yitzchak, because I kind of am on his side on this, means they're making up for their error. They're saying, yes, you're right, we will go. And in fact, to make our point clearly, we'll even go first. We'll even take on this, because it wasn't right what we suggested of us just hanging out here while you rest, go and fight for the rest of Israel. We will accept as punishment almost the role of being in the vanguard for the audacity that we would suggest that being over here was just fine and dandy for us and have a nice time conquering the land.
But then many years later, they are the first ones to be taken away by the Syrians. So somebody didn't accept that apology somehow.
Well, I mean, the underlying request is still not a great request. I mean, they could have said at the very end, tell you what, we'll come with you to the land of Israel, and why don't we just say that all of this goes into a pot, and wherever God throws the lots, that's where we'll go. They could have offered that and gone as equal fighters rather than the vanguard. But instead, they were almost paying for the right to keep this land and keep it out of the lottery, because they didn't trust that God would distribute it fairly. And that may have attributed to why later on, they were still the first to fall. Or it simply may be a matter of geography. They were the first to fall because they were closer.
Well, that's true, but when you say now they're supplicating, they're apologizing, not complete apology, because they still want that piece of land. So maybe that's part of it.
Well, they were apologizing for the part of don't think we're cowards.
Right.
And they weren't apologizing for we're thinking about ourselves first.
We still want what we want.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the Assyrians came and defeated them first.
Right.
Had they done what was supposed to happen, all went over, the wives, the sheep, wouldn't that have been a stronger Israel?
Absolutely.
And so they wouldn't have necessarily,
Yeah.
the Assyrians might not have.
Time and time again, the lesson of the prophets and during the king period is, if Israel had stood together in all ways, even if it had been on the other side of the Jordan, I don't think this would have been a problem. If it had stood together, it would have been able to withstand the assault. And it was because of our internal fractions and the conspiracies and the scheming and the backstabbing and the underlying immorality and theft and everything else that was going on, and murder, that is what made us easy pickings for the Assyrian attack, and then later for the Babylonian to finish the job, and then later for the Romans. Those are the three that are specifically ascribed to these internal divisions.
So it's divide and conquer. We divided ourselves.
Yeah, no one did it for it. No
Right.
one did it to us. We did it to ourselves, and then it's just pick up the pieces, no problem.
So what has changed?
Yeah, we keep the,
Right.
What's supposed to have changed is that we can learn from this.
Okay.
What's changed is that as divided as we are at the moment, there is more unity than in this time, than the time period of the judges or the time period of the late First Temple or the Second Temple, right? We haven't quite reached, and God forbid we ever should, the point where Jews are stabbing Jews in the alleys because of their political views.
Not yet.
We've come close.
We'll come close.
We have had people who have been assaulted. We haven't had any, at least that I know of, attributable murders to this.
Well,
No,
Rabbi,
Except for Rabbi. Yes.
Except-
We haven't had any consistent
Yes.
organized groups. Right. I mean, we have had, yes, the assassination of Rabin definitely is a stain upon us. But it's still one out of many, many years compared to what was a constant state during the period of the first two temples. So I think we are, I'm not saying we're not slipping the wrong direction, because a lot of the rhetoric right now, most recently with the whole idea that non-Orthodox Jews aren't real Jews being expressed by a minister in the government of Israel, which is the most recent of many comments and actions which say the same idea. We are certainly slipping the wrong direction in rhetoric and policy, but I believe that in the average heart of the average Jew, we still see each other as being part of Klal Yisrael. We argue and we don't like a lot of what other people do. We're Jews and human, so that's not too surprising. But most of us have not cut the rope to say, I'm no longer going to even think of these people as part of my people. Some have. I don't believe the majority have. many of the loud politicians have, many of the people who are trying to do fundraising have. But I think the average person, not yet. And that may just be naive optimism on my part, but I'd rather believe that we haven't reached that stage yet than think we've crossed that line as a group. So yes, a lot has remained unchanged. But one of the ways that we can fight this tendency is to do what Abarbanel was trying to do. I mean, I think, as I said, that Akedat Yitzchak is probably right in his assessment, in my opinion, in my reading of this text and other commentaries, of their request. But I think Abarbanel was right for what you should actually do when you hear something that sounds shocking, which is try to figure out what the person might have meant that wouldn't have been as offensive and wrong as it sounded when you heard it. It's that kaf zachut, the side of merit interpretation methodology advocated by Pirkei Avot, the looking at, well, maybe the person was upset about something else. Maybe they chose very bad words. Maybe they were arguing of a different point, and this was an example that was ill-conceived. Maybe this is a policy that they think is important because of X, Y, and Z, which I agree with. I just disagree with the policy because it has certain implications. It doesn't mean you stop fighting. It doesn't mean that you don't occasionally let the person know how it sounded. It sounds like you're asking to be cowards.
I hear you saying that
Yes.
you're going to stay here rather than go fight.
Is that really what you mean?
Let me get this
Yeah, let me get this straight. But giving the person the benefit of the doubt, even when they come back to you and say, yeah, that's what I meant, at least has shown them that you want to maintain that connection, that you're not just going to always interpret everything someone else says in the worst possible way because you've already decided that you disagree with them, or you've already decided that they're cowards. You've already decided they're all terrible. They're all fill in the blank of whatever you think those people are like. Having to choose to do that every single time makes it much harder to simply dehumanize and stereotype the opinions of people that we may even consistently disagree with. And then we still have to treat them as a case by case of what is this person asking me right now? Not, is this the same thing they asked me last month? Because that's what Moses may have done in Abarbanel's interpretation. And as you pointed out, Kathy, he was just interpreting the same way that they'd asked before, and he didn't recognize the nuance. We have to give ourselves the humility to say, maybe there was a nuance I missed in their request, because that really sounded offensive. And then once you've analyzed it, if it's still offensive, you say, you know what, that's just wrong. It's not easy, but being a nation never has been. And
Being a family doesn't.
being a family isn't easy either. And they come with similar responsibilities. Right. One way, for those of you that are local, if you're not planning to attend our Mishnah class tonight, I'd like to point out that there is a good opportunity to act for the unity of Israel. There is a program this evening being run by the Zionistas for the opposition of the BDS, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement, which is being used to try and cripple Israel. I don't have the details off the top of my head. Thank you.
Starts at 7, Eastmont Civic Center in Maitland, or Altamont Springs.
Yeah, Altamont.
Okay.
So you can study Mishnah tonight, or you can go and fight for BDS tonight and study Mishnah tomorrow on the YouTube. The choice is yours, but obviously we got to make sure we're standing together with our brothers and sisters in Israel, either tonight, tomorrow, always.
Yesterday on Diane Ream show, Abe Foxman was on the occasion of his retirement from the ADL, and